It's interesting that in the book you point out that an important aspect of what you're talking about is the fact that in different cultures we have different value systems, like you just said, when it comes to emotions. And probably the most fascinating of those is shame, which in the West is usually seen as the Satan of emotions. The mantra usually goes that in order to achieve mental well-being, you have to liberate yourself from any sense of shame. However, in other cultures, and again, Japan comes to mind, you say shame is a much more almost like a desirable emotion. Can you break that down a little bit?
The reason that shame is so bad in Western cultures, I think, is that because it does two things that we don't like. One is it threatens our self-esteem, and our dignity is based on what we think about ourselves, of our internal value. And the other is it makes clear that we're dependent on other people's judgment, and we don't like that either. Now, in cultures where other people's judgments are foregrounded anyway, where your value is always in the eyes of other people, and where you want to really accommodate or look good according to the norms and the roles that I shared. Shame is well, first of all, shame tells other people that you're aware of those norms and that you care about being a good person in the system. And shame probably also has different consequences in that other people accept you for it, that it's a good thing to have. So I think in the case of shame, there are many, many cultures in which shame is a good thing that needs to be taught to kids and that make kids, well behaved, um, consider knowing their position in the hierarchy, knowing their role. And so they're included rather than excluded. It's a sign of inclusion if you can feel shame. I mean, it certainly has helped me to see the other side of shame. And there are philosophers, for example, who say, in Western cultures, we could use a little more of the shame of, say, caring about what other people think about you or how you could improve yourself. And we could use a little less of the anger of what I'm entitled to. And that would make us maybe a better society. I'm a psychologist, so I just describe. But you can certainly second guess the meaning of those emotions and try to understand what they mean for other people. And I think that realizing that they can have that different meaning does change something in the experience of your own emotions. But it doesn't change overnight. Something that you've learned, for 30, 40, 50, 60 years isn't going to disappear because you think about it once in a different way. It's a lifelong experience. But experiences are being, people continue to have new experiences. So this could be one of them.
Yeah, even if I succeeded, and became like completely shameless and thought it was a good thing, I would create an outcast of myself, like an eccentric at the best and like a total outcast in society
I don't
at
know that
worst.
I don't know that there's any culture where people are shameless. But because it's a very social emotion, but there are cultures where shame is given a place and seen as something positive for society. And there are cultures where shame is really not giving a positive place, or where it's only considered to be to be dysfunctional. And I think many Western societies are closer to the dysfunctional view, and I don't think that's completely right. I mean, shame has clear functions because it keeps you committed to the norms. I mean, if I didn't have shame, I would walk around naked if it were warm, and scream at the top of my lungs. I wouldn't be any. I wouldn't consider the opinions of others, and so shame makes me the social person that I am. Um, but I think, yeah, in terms of how positive or negative is it, or how much does it how negatively or positively does it reflect on the person who feels it? I think it can be different cross culturally and also between individuals.
It's also really interesting when you said about this kind of maxim in the West: you shouldn't care about what other people think. We grew up with that kind of like the ultimate badass was a person who didn't care what anybody else thinks, and you
Yeah.
thought this person has no problems at all, you know. And now that I've grown up a little bit, it doesn't sound like the best advice out there, to be honest. To be
No.
honest, because how do you not care about what people that you care about or that you love think? I mean, that you'll probably be a psychopath or
Yes,
something.
exactly. That's the definition of a psychopath. Exactly. So most people, when we say we don't feel shame, I mean, some sociologists say it's the unstated emotion. It's like it's what everybody even in Western cultures, it's the emotion that everybody tries to avoid coming to the foreground. But everybody has shame or embarrassment constantly. And that's how we keep our interactions normal. Of course, we care. I mean, if we didn't care about each other, there would be no relationship, no socially appropriate behavior. So that's the absolute definition of a human being is that we care about others, and we couldn't live without caring about others or without being part of a social community. So really, shame is what we absolutely need to live in groups. It's what we want to avoid it from being too big and too painful. But exactly that's the motivation that shame gives us. And so it's, one of the ways of saying shame is the ultimate social emotions that makes us into social beings. So we couldn't live without it. And if we do, we end up in prison or hurting a lot of people
Please
otherwise.
subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I've been told I have to say that, otherwise nothing happens. Weird. Also, if you feel like it, support me on Patreon. This is a one-person pod. I do everything myself. There's no team behind me, so please feel free to hop on Patreon and find smart cookies on there. And then last but certainly not least, I have to thank my existing patrons. Tovarishi and Tovarishice, you legends, you. Without you, there would be no pod. Which makes you actual producers of this show. So eternal thanks to Jush Premro, Nate Sirk, Goran Ivasic, Anje Sever, Ole, Marin Ferrara, Aljaš Macher, Strole, Aida, Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Goran, Gordon, Lorenzo, Jurečuk, Mila, Carmen, Veronica, and Taichi. Seriously, I'm touched. Thank you so much.